We are an IT solution company that seeks to help our customers meet all their IT-related goals or requirements. These are some of the OEMs that we currently partner with. So our agenda for today, we're going to recap what we looked at during the last session, and then we're going to discuss how companies can protect, or how you can protect your company's Office 365 data. So in the last session, we had a look at disaster recovery and disaster recovery planning. We tried to look at the different things you needed to consider in your plan. We tried to look at the factors, to look at what you should take note of when you were planning, when you were making your disaster recovery plan, and what a proper plan should look like. We also tried to see the importance of disaster recovery and having a plan for your organization. Then we looked at what your disaster recovery timeline should be like. Then we discussed things like your recovery point objectives and your recovery time objectives. We also tried to look at how there might be some level of service that is implied, either based on the sector that our business is operating or the organization operating, or based on maybe what our customers expect from us. So, for example, if you were a bank or a financial house, your customers will expect that at any time they needed to use maybe your online application or your website, that it should function properly. They don't want any hitches. So there might be money that will be lost if a business is unable to serve its customers for an extended period of time. So we also looked at business continuity, and then we said that business continuity was the ability of a business to continue running or continue performing its basic business functions when a disaster has occurred. So in some cases, you need to, as much as possible, be able to still serve your customers even while you might be grappling whatever IT-related disaster that you're dealing with. We also try to look at what you should expect from a modern backup solution. So in the last session, we also established that backup was critical to any disaster recovery plan that you have. Even the recovery timeline, the most important factors there was still backup. So we looked at what you should expect from a modern backup solution, and then we mentioned things like scalability. So that's the ability of that solution to meet up with the growth of maybe your IT infrastructure. Then you're looking at speed and how reliable it will be. So in a number of cases that we've seen, most companies that had IT-related disasters, part of the reasons why they found it difficult or they lost more money than they would have liked to was because they had backups quite all right. A number of them did have backups, but maybe they weren't tested. So after the disaster had occurred, they discovered that those backups were not even usable. So you need a reliable solution. You need to be able to test that the backups you are even taking are usable and can be utilized in the event of a disaster. So we also looked at what a good backup rule would be, or what a good backup strategy should be. So we said you should have 3 different copies of your data. You should try to make use of 2 different media, and then you should at least have 1 offsite copy. And when we began to look at Vim, which is a backup solution that we discussed in the last session, we said with Vim, you can take it further and have 1 air-gapped or immutable copy of your backup. So an immutable copy is one that you would not have to be difficult for you to make changes to that particular copy. So if there was maybe malware or ransomware in the backup that you had taken, and it was in an immutable backup, it's difficult for changes to be made to that particular backup that you have. So the idea behind immutable backups is that you're either making use of things like tapes, or you're using a hardened Linux repository, so it makes it difficult for changes to be made to the backups that you have taken. So the other factor we also mentioned, or the last part of the strategy, was having 0 errors after backup. So you need to be able to verify with Vim. You'll be able to verify your ability to recover the backups that you have been taking. So today, we're going to be looking at how your company should deal with, or how you should deal with your company's Office 365 data, and how you should be able to protect it. So I'm sure many of us should be familiar with what Office 365 is, or the capabilities that it provides for today's organizations. So I don't know how many of us currently use Office 365. I'm going to launch a poll now. I'd like us to answer the poll. So of course, there are other options on the market. You might have Google Workspace and other software as a service offerings that you could use to work in an organization. So I'll end the poll now, and so about 60% of the people who took part in the poll said they currently use Office 365. Okay, so I think that's 50%. So that means a number of us currently use Office 365. So let's go on. So Office 365, all of us will agree that it plays an important role in how we work today. So there are a number of things that it helps us to achieve. We are able to improve the ability to collaborate within our organizations. So why would an organization need Office 365? So if we're even looking at it, Office 365 is a cloud-based service. So by default, Microsoft should be having backups of what you are doing. So you shouldn't even be worried. And then it's Microsoft and it hardly goes down. So that's another consideration. So one of the things that we saw, especially with the pandemic that we experienced last year, was that there was an increase in adoption for not only Office 365, but other software as a service tools. So, and that increase in adoption brought about more threats that companies need to deal with and grapple or be able to handle. And then it also makes it it's like a wider attack surface for threat actors. And then there are other things that you have to consider, especially with confidential data that might exist within your software as a service tenants. So even with the pandemic, also saw an increase in remote workers. So you had people maybe using their personal devices to work. We also had people who were maybe not even updating their devices, so they weren't getting the necessary security patches. Then a number of people, I don't know how many of us would have maybe put a firewall in our houses or in our homes. So that's another factor. People don't really put firewalls in their homes to secure their home networks. And then a number of people also make use of public Wi-Fi connections, and it's like they are just running out in the open without any form of protection. So for those of us that might be familiar with how Office 365 licensing works, if you're looking at it from a basic level, there are like 3 tiers that everybody should be used to. So you have your E1 licenses, then your E3, and then E5. So from a cybersecurity perspective, you would expect that at least for an E1 license, users should be able to have old versions of their files in the original location. So they should have different versions of a particular file in the original locations, and things like data loss prevention. So the way data loss prevention works is that you could prevent the exploitation of business or personal identifiable data to external sources, but things like that are not accessible to people using E1 licenses. Then things like conditional access is only available to users or companies who make use of E5 licenses and all of that. So there are a number of, if you look at this table that is on the screen, some threats are fully addressed. For some other issues, they are just maybe there's a little bit of capability. You can achieve those things to a certain extent. And then in some cases, it's not even addressed at all. But now for threat detection, accounts that are on E1 and E3 licenses are relatively porous. So there are a number of things that won't be detected in your tenants if it has to do with E1 and E3 licensed accounts. So for governance, risk, and compliance, which is important to most organizations today, maybe you have certain data protection policies that guide your organization. You might have certain things that you're looking at to achieve from a data protection perspective that might be implied based on the type of business that you are running. It might also be sector implied. Maybe you are bound by rules from your regulator, and then your regulator expects certain things to be achieved, and all of that is not done. So you also have to take care of these considerations as well. So the same table
So,
I had.
please, sorry to interrupt you. I can see someone is raising his hand, Mr. Larry.
Okay.
Do you want to take the questions now, or?
Emilia, I'm done with this section. I'll take the question.
Okay, Mr. Larry, we'll take your question after the session, please.
All right, that'll be fine.
Okay, so for Office 365, there's a feature called legal hold. So legal hold allows you to have audit logs that apply to certain users, or even maybe your entire tenants held for a particular period of time. So you could hold audit logs. You could also hold certain files and information for a period of time. But then the problem with that is, for example, for people that are on E1 licenses, it lasts for I think only 90 days or so, and then for every other person, you can have it for up to about 10 years. So if there was maybe a legal related issue, and then maybe that 90 days has passed, and then maybe the person was an E1 user, you might not have any access to that information again. So in case maybe you have to defend, your company has to defend itself in court, there might not be any data to present. So I don't know whether we're clear up to this point. I think I can take some questions now. So Mr. Larry, can you share a question with us?
Yeah, my question is on this E1 and E3. You initially made a statement prior to the one you said now that there are not so much added security features surrounding the E1 and the E3. Now, if you look at this, what's the relative difference between E1 and E3?
There are other differences that I didn't cover in these tables. I was just trying to bring it up from
maybe baseline. We'll work with maybe baseline.
Okay, yeah, E1 is like it's almost like an entry-level license. So it's just as much features as you need to start working. So maybe just web access to some office applications and all of that. So by default, E1 doesn't even come with, let's say, the advanced Microsoft Defender protection. So there are some security features or options that you might not even get if your entire organization, for example, was running on an E1 licenses. So you would need to, I don't have the exact breakdown here. This is not really an Office 365 presentation. I just needed to bring out certain things from a data protection perspective, but we'll be open to sharing all of that with you later. But there are differences in the features. There are more products that might be available to people who have maybe E3 licenses, and then there are more features that are even available if you were using E5 licenses. I don't know whether there's any other question. Okay, if there's no other question, let's continue to the next section. So let's look at the reasons why you would typically need an Office 365 backup. So one of the common reasons might be accidental deletion. Then a number of times you might also have to deal with retention policies. So you can configure all of that in your tenant as an admin. If you're an admin, you can configure all of that. But there might be things that you didn't take into consideration, or things that you felt, it should apply to this, it should apply to this type of users as well, or this type of data as well. And then maybe there were gaps and those policies didn't flow over to meet your intentions. So there also may be internal security threats to deal with, and external security threats, then legal and compliance requirements. Like I mentioned before, there might be a need for you to have users' data, even if they've left the organization. You might need to still have that for a long period of time, even beyond when they may have left the organization. Then you might also have to deal with managing hybrid deployments and migrations. So in case for any reason you have to move your Office 365 data from maybe your tenant to somewhere else, it will be good that you have a backup before you go ahead and do that, so that in case there's a problem, you easily have something to fall back to. So A seventh reason is has to do with Teams, Microsoft Teams. So I'm sure a number of us will also be familiar with how Microsoft Teams work and all the things that you can do with it. So the truth about Microsoft Teams is the data is pretty much scattered across Office 365. There's no one place that you can say, oh, this is all the data that has to do with Microsoft Teams, because you have SharePoint, you would have your normal Outlook emails, and then you might also be making use of OneDrive in your organization. So there are different data sources for Teams in Office 365. There are different places where Teams data could end up. There are different places where you could also get data to use in Teams. So there's more complexity when it comes to managing Teams data efficiently. So now makes us to ask the question whether it's really necessary for us to have or to make an attempt to back up our company's Office 365 data. So Microsoft recently released a guide for companies to deal with ransomware attacks that affect Microsoft 365 and Office 365. So recently there was also like an update to it last month, and the summary of the guide was that the first step was for you to verify your backups. So how do you verify your backups if I'm not sure how to put the question, but how exactly do you intend to verify your backups if you didn't have any? So for example, by default, Microsoft will allow you to restore some of the files that you might have, maybe not everything. But there's no option in Office 365 for backups. Yes, OneDrive serves as like a backup solution, and then you could use that to back up files within your organizations to OneDrive. But there's no backup essentially for things like your Outlook and even Teams. So there's no way to back up the data that you might have within your Office 365 tenants from maybe the admin console for Office 365. So it's expected that maybe you would have had maybe a third-party software to deal with all of that. So one of the first step is that you should verify your backup. So that means obviously Microsoft expects you to have backup. I'm sure other software as a service offerings also expect that you should keep some form of backup at least. Then the rest of the steps is that you should disable Exchange Active Sync and OneDrive Sync. Then you should remove malware from affected devices, recover files on a clean computer or device. Then you could also recover your files in OneDrive for Business and recover deleted email. So for this Active Sync and OneDrive Sync, you could also use it as security tooling. So you could also decide to some companies decide to pick common extensions that are used by ransomware groups. So let's say when a ransomware group attacks an organization, there's a particular extension that they change files to, let's say maybe .etf or something. You could set up your OneDrive in a way that anytime a user's file has been changed to maybe one of those extensions that ransomware groups use, it won't be able to sync into the OneDrive account, but it will see it as one of the extensions that is not permitted. So that is also another security option for your organization if you are using Office 365. So there's another poll just to find out how many of us have already backed up our Office 365 data. Okay. So I think I'll end the poll now and share the results. So we have 29% saying that they currently back up their Office 365 data, and 71% saying they don't. So there's a need for us to take backup seriously, especially if you take this advice from Microsoft when it comes to dealing with ransomware incidents. So the International Data Corporation, which is like a top analyst firm when it comes to data protection, says that regardless of whether the data is on-premise or in the cloud, or you're making use of software as a service like Office 365, Google Workspace, Salesforce, and the likes, the ultimate responsibility of data protection lies with the customer or the data owner. So if we drill it down, it should come down to maybe the IT team within the company or the company itself. So the responsibility to protect the data actually lies with the data owner. So it's a risky strategy for you to adopt or make use of software as a service without trying to factor in how you should back up or protect the data that might be linked to your software as a service product. So let's look at the responsibility model, or the shared responsibility model for Office 365 and the customer. So by default, the primary responsibility is that Microsoft will maintain the infrastructure. Microsoft will maintain the infrastructure on which Office 365 is running. So they're responsible to make sure that it runs most of the time or all of the time. Then your own responsibility is for your Office 365 data, as well as access and control of your data residing in your Office 365 tenants. So you're responsible for how people access the data that might exist in your tenants. You're responsible for placing control measures on the data that you have put in your tenants. So you can't say, somebody got access to data that they were not meant to get access to. I'm going to sue Microsoft for it. Because in the agreement that you signed, you also agreed, you don't sign the agreement. So you usually click this, I accept the terms and agreements. So in that agreement, it's part of it that you are bound to this shared responsibility model. So another thing that Microsoft will be responsible for is the supporting technology. For example, if you went with dual redundancy for your data, you would expect that even in the data center, or by default, I think it applies to all Office 365 accounts, you would expect that even if the data center where your actual tenant is located happen to go down, it's none of your business. Microsoft will handle all of that in the background, but you're expected to at least have a copy of your data stored in a different location. You're also expected to have full data retention and also meet up with the regulations that you might be bound by or bound to that relate to data protection. So you're expecting that all the policy gaps is taken care of by you, the customer. Then from a security perspective, they are responsible for user and administration and administrator control. They're responsible for physical security for the data center. Microsoft is also responsible for logical security and application level security. So for example, you wouldn't expect that, someone should be able to get from one tenant and access data that is in another organization's tenant. So Microsoft is responsible for all those things. And as the customer or the data owner, they're responsible to place controls or restrictions against accidental deletion, malicious insiders, employee retaliation, and evidence tampering. So you're also responsible to take care of things like ransomware, malware, hackers, and also rogue applications that might be tied to your Office 365 tenants. So the last part of the model is regulatory. So Microsoft is responsible for making sure that they keep up to, that their data centers keep up to the data privacy and regulatory controls. So if there are industry certifications that Microsoft needs to adhere to, or that they're required to adhere to, it is their own duty to ensure that all those regulations are met. Then, as the data owner, you're expected to meet the regulations that apply to you specifically, maybe based on the country that you're operating or industry regulation. And you're also responsible for demands from maybe internal legal and compliance officers. So if you look at this model properly, you will see that the way you might have been picturing the security of your Office 365 tenants might not have been adequate enough. You might have been placing a lot of hope on Microsoft and expecting more than what they are legally bound to take care of. I don't know if anybody has any question.
Yes, I do have one. My name once again is Sanusi Olanrewaju. Thank you very much for the presentation. What's the role of a DAG, Database Availability Group, in like automatic database level recovery of say maybe server or network failure in terms of Microsoft, in terms of Exchange mailbox servers?
Okay, are you talking about physical servers or Exchange Online?
I'm talking about physical because the DAG uses continuous replication and a subset of Windows failover, a kind of clustering technology, to provide high availability of site resilience.
Okay, so the way that works is the role of that is to ensure that, for example, if you had maybe, it's expected that you might be using maybe about 2 or 3 servers or so. Okay. If one location were to go down, the other locations will still serve
the same purpose automatically without nobody knowing.
Yes, so the end user is not meant to even notice that
happening at the background.
Yes.
Does this solution also available on the cloud?
Yes, you can back up to any location. You can use it in any location. You can use it for cloud. You can use it on-prem. You can also use it at a data center.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So the next thing is retention policies for Office 365. So this is like a summary of what the default retention policies are. So by default, for your inbox, your email inbox or folder data, you should expect that at least it should stay for about 2 years before it is moved to the archive in Office 365. So, but the other constraints will be if maybe your mailbox, for example, you had already reached the capacity. So you might have to move some items to the archive earlier than you would have loved to. So another policy affects deleted items. So deleted items stay within Office 365 for about a month before they are permanently deleted. So for data that you may have also set to be automatically archived, it stays for about 1 month before it's also moved to the archive. And for deleted SharePoint online sites and items, as well as OneDrive, it stays for about a month in the first stage recycle bin, and then it should still be available in the second stage recycle bin for about 2 months, bringing everything that you might lose a few things. So the last consideration is if an employee leaves the company. So by default, everything stays for about a month before it's permanently deleted. So Office 365 backup and retention policies can only protect you from data loss in a limited way. If you look at this, it's actually limited. There are events that you might notice maybe a year after, maybe even 3 months. So there's like a limitation. So you need to be, and these policies might also not meet up with your organization's requirements. Then being able to monitor these policies, I'm sure there are some departments that people that are in that department, you would love to keep their data or the documents they have access to for a longer period of time. Like maybe people that have to do with people that have things to do with financial rules or financial applications for your company, you would love to at least ensure that the data that is tied to those people stays for a longer time within your organization. So the average time, if you take into consideration that the average time for you to discover data compromise or discover that, there's been a security related incident, is about 140 days. And the default settings might only protect you for about 30 to 90 days. It leaves you to wonder if you are adequately protecting your company, or if you are adequately able to deal with the data protection risk that your company faces. So you need to take all of this into consideration and maybe have a rethink of what your retention policy is like. So this brings us to Vim Backup for Office 365. So Vim Backup for Office 365 is a product by Vim that allows organizations to eliminate the risk of losing access to their data or to data that was tied to their Office 365 tenants. So it allows them to also be flexible and actually keep those data and information as long as they want to keep it for. So that retention policy that I showed you before, if you were making use of Vim, you can keep all those things for as long as you want to, because it's like you're just taking a backup of everything that was in your tenants. So a secondary location. So it could either be the cloud or it could be maybe on-prem. So you could keep your Office 365 data, as the case may be, for as long as you want to keep it. So while Office 365 is a brilliant product that eliminates the need for you to have to maybe maintain your own servers for your emails or your own Exchange servers, there are also some underlying risks that are tied to it. So as we have already mentioned, the data belongs to you, and the responsibility to also protect your organization's data is in your hand. So you need a solution that will effectively help you to achieve all of that. So with Vim Backup for Office 365, you can protect your Office 365 data. You also have the option to quickly restore individual Office 365 items and files. So imagine if maybe you only needed one specific file. So you have the option for granular recovery that will allow you to just get down to that specific file and recover that file. It also makes it easy for you to meet up with your legal and compliance requirements. So for Vim backup for Office 365, there are about 40 options, or let's say 40 use cases. So either it's Exchange Online, even for Exchange on-prem servers, it's also useful to deal with backing up or protecting those servers as well. So we would also be sharing this book at the end of the webinar as a follow-up to also provide you with more information that will help your organization make the right decision. So we have come to the end of my presentation. I don't know whether there are any questions.
Good afternoon. Please, can you send us the slides after the meeting?
Yes, the slide will also be provided.
Thank you so much. Then one more thing, can I'd like to request for a Vim demo. Is it something we can arrange?
Yes, it's something we'll be able to arrange.
All right, thank you.
Does anybody have any other question? So if there are no other questions, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today, and we appreciate your presence with us.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I hope.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Mr. Larry.
Okay. Hello?
Mr. Larry, do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to say thank you. Thank you for the webinar.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. We'll send the slides and probably the recording of the session. And then we hope that you also join us in our subsequent webinars. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good.
All right.